Hello and welcome to IR Thinker, where we explore the world of international relations one critical issue at a time. I'm Martin Zupko. Before we begin, I would like to highlight two milestones. First, this is the 100th episode of IR Thinker. And second, our very first episode published on the 5th of January 2023 was also with my special guest today, Andreas Schroeder. Hello, Andreas.
Hi there.
Andreas was the first expert who accepted my invitation and in doing so believed in this project when it was only an idea. For that, I want to express my sincere gratitude for your trust and foresight back in 2023. It's my privilege, therefore, to welcome you again today, Andreas. And as IR Thinker reaches this important milestone, and as my questions have become rather more demanding, let's enjoy this episode and let's enjoy our topic today, which is the evolving role of natural gas in Germany. Germany's gas system has been remade at remarkable speed, from dependence on Russian pipeline supplies in 2022 and 2020 and even before, because the situation has been evolving, to now we have Norwegian flows and the large scale of LNG from the United States. And this transformation raises pressing questions about contracts, infrastructure, and even competitiveness in the European Union. So let's start with a few questions, but even before, I want to remind our viewers who don't remember you, because it's already 2 years, as I said, that you are the head of energy analyst team or department at the Independent Commodity Intelligence Services, or ICIS, where you lead the international team of analysts and you are responsible for the data, for our graphs that we are reading, for the reports that we are reading from your company. And I think it's quite a remarkable job that you've been doing. So the first question we have is about the Germany's supply mix, which evolved between 2021 and 2024. And I want to ask you, what does this pivot or this movement mean for Germany when it comes to Russian pipeline gas, which basically was stopped? And now you have Norwegian gas flowing to Germany. So how the situation is changing the strategy for the Germany regarding the long-term contracts? Are you now having a long-term contracts with Norway, or is it the spot price? Or how do you evolve in this matter?
Yeah, so since the phase out of Russian gas from Germany, Norway has become the key supplier for Germany, really, by far. So it is the majority of gas that comes to Germany, which is drawn from Norway. So the pipelines are super important. Nevertheless, there are not really long-term contracts with Norway. It seems to be that the commercial entities prefer having spot LNG or other rather short-term contracts of a year length. And that's enough because we trust the Norwegians and there's an established trade relation. Norwegians like to sell at hub prices. They would like to keep their flexibility so they can sell at all of the European hubs and play on the margins between those hubs. Therefore, they don't want to get bound to sticky flows which do not represent actual trade patterns and good pricing. Therefore, Norwegian gas pipelines and Norwegian gas flows to Europe are often just spot gas, spot market traded. And US LNG is coming in, and there Germany is relying more and more on that source of supply. And there are new long-term contracts on that space with LNG suppliers.
And why is pipeline gas short-term contract as a preferred option? Because I think that's quite interesting, because many people would think it's opposite, because pipeline gas is straightforward. You have a pipeline, so you can sign for 10 years or 20 years, and you know that this pipeline is going to be there.
It's true. Especially with Gazprom, we are used to a business model where long-term contracts are the backup for pipeline build-out. And the same was true for Norway in the beginning phase of the Norwegian rise as a gas supplier to Europe. Now, pipelines have been written off, they have been built, they are established, the infrastructure is available, and now you don't need to build new pipelines, you can now play on margins, you can play on spreads between countries, and you want to keep this flexibility as supplier to sell where you get the most money. And that flexibility is good for Norwegians to maximize their profits. And therefore, there was no prolongation of the existing long-term contracts, which ended often in early 2000s, or 2010 decade. So there were established long-term contracts with Norwegian suppliers. They just have not been prolonged because suppliers and off-takers both prefer just buying and selling on hub indexation. And so it was no point in doing long-term contracts. Also, there is good trust between the players, so they can rely on each other. Therefore, you don't need long-term contracts. You don't need this legal stability, which can protect yourself against counterparty risk or against political risk or so. You don't need that in the case of Norway because there's just a trust in the stability of the country and in the stability of the supplier.
We mentioned that there is a significant portion of LNG coming from, for instance, United States. So naturally there is a question, as that supply mix is changing, has Germany needed to upgrade the LNG infrastructure? I'm asking this question because we know that this LNG infrastructure is always very expensive, and it takes 2, maybe sometimes 3 years to build a terminal, to build some connections. So how was this change affecting Germany?
Well, Germany built up LNG flexible terminals, vessel-based terminals, very quickly in a speed that was unprecedented for German infrastructure build out. We were surprised ourselves how quick it went. We should admit there were years of planning before that already, so it was not entirely new in 2022. So they could build on existing plans, and then it went very quick because Germany was willing to pay a lot to get these flexible shipping terminals. Now the plan is to extend land-based terminals as well, and they are a bit more they are more fixed and they are more long-term and they are a bit more expensive, and that means they are less flexible. Now, and by that, Germany is making its LNG import demand a bit more sticky, and it's committing itself to a bit more long-term LNG imports. And this is the new strategy. It looks like a bit over-dimensioned if you look at all of the projects that have been once announced, almost as big as the Nord Stream pipeline dimensions. So the idea being you kill Nord Stream pipeline and you replace it with LNG terminals. But I think given the structurally declining gas demand, there is not a need for all of the plants. It was good to build out flexible vessel-based systems initially in times of need, and now they are rented for a few years, for almost a decade or longer, and that could be enough for the time being. And then there's a few land-based terminals that will be well utilized as well.
Right. And what about storage? Because we speak, especially before the winter, we have those graphs like how full is the European Union storage system when it comes to natural gas. And then the reporters and commentators, they always claim like, is it enough or is it not enough? So how is Germany in regarding the natural gas storage? What has changed since the war in Ukraine started?
So ownership of the gas storage has changed to some extent because the company owning gas storages has been switched in terms of ownership. So the state has entered and founded a new company out of Gazprom Germania, which is now called SEFE, Securing Energy for Europe. And they are still owning indirectly some capacity of gas storage. And the problem back then in 2022 was that a lot of the storage facilities have been depleted, maybe on purpose, by Gazprom affiliated entities. And this would not happen again with this new ownership structure. But other than that, gas storage ownership has not changed for the majority of gas storages. So the landscape is the same as a few years ago. Most of the players behave very rationally on the market. So you look at summer winter spreads, at seasonal spreads to fill up your storage or not. Infrastructure providers, storage providers offer their tenders, they offer their bundled capacities. And so that's a very liquid market. It's functioning well. Gas storages have been filling up quite decently in Germany. There were concerns earlier in the year because we were up to 20 percentage points below last year. Nevertheless, these concerns have dissipated over time because storages have filled up by now. We are about to meet the targets with the exception of possibly one larger facility, Reden storage, a 4 BCM storage in northern Germany that is owned by SEFE. But the majority of storage sites will reach their targets for sure, or they have already met their targets in October, even though the targets are for November.
So you're not going to be frozen country during the winter, 100%.
No, and we tested scenarios on what could happen in a cold winter. And we see storages in northwestern Europe deplete to some 35% range in a normal winter situation. Even in a very cold scenario where we would have a extremely cold winter for multiple months, we see German and neighboring storages deplete to some 20%, which is not unprecedented, by the way. So we had that similar low stock levels at the end of winter in 2018. And that was in a year where we were not in danger regarding security of supply. Therefore, our conclusion is we are not so concerned about gas storage for this winter, even in a cold scenario. And what is underpinning and even supporting this view furthermore is the abundant LNG that we see coming next year. That means even if we deplete the storages to low level, we will see probably a wave of new LNG export facilities. And given the new LNG import capacity in Europe we have since a few years, we are more resilient to shocks and more resilient to cold weather episodes.
Andreas, what about the gas consumption reduction in Germany? There are reports and some statistics showing that Germany is using less gas. But then we have mixed feelings because there is export-import of the gas. So what is the real situation with the Germany? Because especially during 2022 and 2023, people are asking, is this a sort of a cycle? So it's going to be like the reduction is going to be further ongoing? Or is it sort of structural change that the economy of Germany is changing, therefore the gas plays a less important role in the industry?
So we were looking at structural indicators of gas demand, and it's particularly weak this year. So if you're discounting for weather effects, which are unique effects, then we will see a structural decline of gas demand this year. And we are already witnessing this in our data. So it's minus 9% drop in gas demand for Germany and neighboring regions this year already in summer. And that means we are structurally in decline for gas demand for this year. And part of the reason is the weakness of industry. And there's also weaker commercial gas demand, right? There is a bit of switching going on. Nevertheless, we do see signs of recovery for German industry, with industrial production possibly picking up again, which can lead to a very moderate growth of industrial gas demand. Residential commercial gas demand can grow as well, because you see customers now facing lower prices, so prices have come down. Therefore, the pressure to save gas is less strong, and that implies residential and commercial gas demand can slightly pick up again due to less savings, less energy efficiency. And then on the power side, that's the interesting thing. 1/3 or a bit less, 1/4 of European gas demand is from the power sector. In the winter period, it's a bit lower, that share. It's towards 20%. And this has been growing very strongly this year due to weak wind, right? And so in windless times, gas burn is higher in the power sector to back up for the missing gap of power supply. And that's what we have witnessed this year. We can see that in our data. Nevertheless, for the coming winter, we're expecting rather this to normalize. So if we get normal wind situation and the normal weather situation, then gas burn in the power sector will be dropping again a bit. Certainly also because the spreads are not really attractive on the curve. So you would burn some coal, lignite first. And gas margins are not really positive, at least not for the base load. So the role for gas power plants is more a peaker role during the evening hours, but certainly not a base load role.
Is Germany building new gas-fired generation sort of power plants, or you are okay with what you have already?
No, there is need for new flexible capacity in the German power system. That implies there is need for not only gas plants, that could be batteries, it could be demand response, it could be grids, all sorts of flexibility that you need, besides regulatory changes, regulatory flexibility that is currently not being provided, with, for instance, batteries not being incentivized enough, and grid fees being too high for some of the suppliers and off-takers, including storage. On the other hand, gas power plants are a relatively cheap form of backup capacity, which Germany needs now. It has the ambition to phase out coal by 2038 or even earlier. And next year we will see decisions on whether this coal phase out remains realistic or not. The government will probably take a position on this. And that depends a bit on the speed of the build out of the ramp up of backup capacity of gas plants. And now the government plans to have tenders of around 10 gigawatt of mostly gas power plants. Whether they are hydrogen ready or CCUS ready, that's another question, but it will probably be gas power plants entering this tender and then winning positions, and probably gaining some subsidies from government to be built. And at the moment, we are speaking of 10 gigawatts additional capacity. The government is contemplating having this at 20 gigawatts or even more, but the 10 gigawatt is what we see realistic at the moment, given that the European Commission has greenlighted that proposal as well.
Andreas, what is the impact of the nuclear power plant, let's call it shutdown, in Germany? Because this is a very popular topic, and people asking why not to keep 3-4 nuclear plants as a backup, even not running 100%. Then the experts, they say you can't do this because nuclear plant is either running or not running, but you can't play with the nuclear power to some extent. So what is the reality now, and how is Germany affected by that nuclear plant phase out in Germany?
So there was an intense discussion on that topic, especially 1 and 2 years ago, when the last stations were phased out and then plugged off the grid. And back then, the decision was still possible, and it was certainly technically possible to order new fuel rods for nuclear plants and replace them and extend the running times of these nuclear plants. That was technically possible. The challenge is rather a political challenge to gain majorities for such a decision, and that has been traditionally the challenge of the German energy sector. So the crowd, the majority of Germans is just skeptical on nuclear, to say the least. It was changing to some extent. The mood was a bit more pro-nuclear in recent years, when it became a bit too late almost, because by then most of the nuclear has been phased out already, with the exception of last generation plants, pressurized reactors of the last generation built in the late 1980s. So they were still operating. Now it looks like it's a bit too late to reactivate this whole discussion, and it would be a very tough political challenge to get majorities for such a decision. And then also we're talking about not so big volumes any longer. So if you open 4 gigawatt of nuclear, you will get a bit of baseload back. But by now, you have already dismantled some of the parts of the power plant. So it is probably a bit too late now. So it would be more costly now.
Let's speak a little bit about the market, about buying natural gas. And we know that when we speak about the Europe, there is like mostly TTF price, or we speak about that market sort of hub. But is there anything evolving in Germany in terms of innovation in buying natural gas? Is there any new, let's say, market spot price determined by the German natural gas? Or how is this situation evolving in the European Union? Because we know that the European Union has some regulations, some visions. You know, there was a vision to buy natural gas together as a European Union. There are more platforms. So since we spoke 2 years ago, what has changed, if anything?
One of the innovations, one of the attempts to innovate the market and to boost the buying power of the European Union was the aggregate EU platform. That was a proposal brought forward by the European Union, the European Commission, to aggregate demand power of the EU players, and also to collect smaller entities who have little access to the market. We are skeptical on this platform. It didn't materialize as a large-scale platform for buying natural gas. It was useful for some rather smaller players, but the large existing entities who have access to the market, they didn't get into this business. So they are still using their traditional routes of supplying and buying gas. And now it's not an innovation any longer to have hub markets. This is not innovative in itself, but it is a change that we observe in these years. The THE, Trading Hub Europe, is the index or the hub for Germany for gas markets, and that was established not so long ago. So Germany used to have 2 different hubs. They merged into one single hub, and that was back then, some 3 years ago. It was an innovation. By now, it's not new any longer, but it's clearly a hub that is now establishing itself as a transit hub for European gas, increasingly so. And that means liquidity is going up, trading on that hub is going up, and the role of Germany is reflected in the trading volumes on this hub, which is now competing with a few other hubs in Europe, and it's certainly growing in size.
Is Germany exporting natural gas? Because we spoke how Germany is importing, we spoke about pipeline and LNG, but then you have a question, is a big country in the center of European Union, so what is the situation with the natural gas export when it comes to Germany?
Traditionally, The gas flows have been from east to the west. That was the traditional direction when Russian supply was the prime supplier to Europe. Now those directions have changed, and the situation in Germany is reflecting this change. So Germany is now importing to some extent even from France, very small volumes from France, but it shows the direction has changed. And most importantly, though, Netherlands and Belgium are key suppliers for Germany. Indirectly, this is LNG taken into Zeebrugge and Rotterdam and Eemshaven facilities. So LNG to Germany is coming via Netherlands and Belgium. Also, Norway is key supplier. So Germany is and remains an importing nation for natural gas. Fossil fuels is an import business for Germany by and large. Nevertheless, the interesting change we're observing in these years is there's more exports from Germany towards Central Europe. So that is a slight change we observe, and that means Germany is itself placing itself as a hub for Central European gas, as a transit hub for Central European gas. We see that exports to Austria, Czech Republic, and to Poland have increased. Actually, they have dropped a bit in 2024, but now in our most recent data, they increased in 2025, and we're forecasting that to remain stable for the coming years, to grow for Austria, Czech, and Poland. So that means Germany is exporting to those countries.
Is there capacity to do it, or do you need to build sort of new pipeline or new interconnector, or how is it?
There is capacity available traditionally that has been flowing east to west, and you can build compressors to switch the direction. That's possible. But anyway, between Germany and Austria, the capacity can go either way. Same for Czech Republic. Now, it's a bit more interesting on the Polish side because there's some quite dynamic developments in the Polish grid as well. For instance, with the former Yamal pipeline, the gas system, transit gas pipeline, which is which was traditionally a transit pipeline, and now you could use it to increase the exports from Germany to Poland via the Malno interconnection point if you improve the connection of that transit pipeline to the Polish grid. So that's something that is contemplated, and it's at least in conception phase on the Polish side. And we know Poland can be quite quick in implementing things if they really want it. And here it absolutely makes sense to make use of an existing pipeline infrastructure to increase interconnected grids in Europe.
We know that Poland, as you mentioned, they built a LNG terminal in Gdańsk in the northern Poland.
Yeah.
And that basically is something new for the situation in the Central Europe. So can we say that in the future, Germany and Poland might compete in LNG transit or LNG export-import business?
To some extent, I agree. There is a bit of competition between LNG hubs, certainly, and that means Germany and Poland can compete to some extent in delivering Central Europe, which is landlocked and therefore in need for other suppliers to import the LNG. But I would not overrate this competition, really, because it's a route selection. Would you go via the Baltic Sea? Would you go via the German Sea? And it is especially a competitive challenge for the Eastern German terminal at Rügen or Mukan facility, because that lies very close to Świnoujście, Gdansk, and so on. There, the competition is a bit more obvious, whilst the Western German facilities, Brunsbüttel, Wilhelmshaven, they have the advantage of being closer to US LNG, right? So it takes a day less for US ships to go to Western Germany rather than going all of the detour to Danzig and Rügen. time is money, so taking 1 day less and 1 day retour less, that's saving a lot of money.
Yeah, 1 day means around $100,000 in real prices. So for some people, that's for some traders, that's a quite significant money. Let's speak a little bit about the geopolitics as we have the last 15 minutes of this interview.
Yeah.
What about the claims that Germany, after being dependent on Russia, is now dependent on Norway and the United States? And these claims are coming from commentators, from experts, and some people are asking, what is the level of trust, as we already spoke about this, and is there anything that Berlin can do to hedge this situation and to secure its own energy security in case something happens?
One of the first things you can do is to increase your domestic production rather than importing fracked gas from the US and just relocating environmental problems to other supply regions in the world. You could be more honest and just produce it domestically. Nevertheless, this will never satisfy the big need of Germany for fossil fuels. Therefore, you will need an import strategy. And that strategy is a strategy of diversification. So there's not only US LNG. At the moment, Germany is hugely relying on this one country as supply for LNG. More than 90% of the German LNG imports are from America. Yet it's not comparable to the Russian dependency. Because here in the US, you're dealing with multiple suppliers, you're dealing with competitive companies, where you're dealing with companies who are not government owned, who don't obey to the president necessarily. Yes, they are American, but they are not controlled as much. So it's multiple suppliers. And secondly, they are not used as weaponized energy so far. Who knows, there could be risks going forward. So it's not a good strategy to rely only on one country as supplier. And Germany knows that. Therefore, the strategy includes dealing with Middle Eastern suppliers, Qatar, and new emerging Middle Eastern suppliers like the Emirates, who are ambitious in terms of increasing their exports of LNG. And there are existing contracts indeed. For instance, with ADNOC, the Emirates supplier, contracts are starting over the next years. Not all of these contracts are American-based, but a lot of them.
So this diversification might help. But then you have even more sophisticated claims coming from the LNG import from Russia, from Novatek, for instance, which Belgium, Spain, and other countries, they continue doing so. Even there are attempts from the European Union to completely stop this. So how can you assess this situation? For instance, let's imagine that the European Union has adopted already the sanctions and there is no LNG coming from Russia. Is this any significant or minor problem for Germany?
It's not a significant problem for Germany directly because there are no ships coming from Russia and delivering to Germany directly. It is a bit more of a problem for Belgium, France, and Spain, who are still having existing long-term contracts with Novatek, the Russian supplier of LNG. And those contracts go well into the 2030s. So they will have to be broken if you want to stop Russian LNG by December 27 or even earlier. And for them, this is a problem. It's certainly a problem for a company like Total Energy in France, which is even owning upstream assets and which has ownership engagements, assets in Russia, which could be at risk of, who knows, expropriation or at least to be completely written off, which they have already done in their balance sheet. That for them, it's a bit more of a problem. For Germany, they have made themselves independent of Russia. Nevertheless, if you stop Russian LNG very early, very soon, that has repercussions for the global LNG markets. It's very much functioning as a global or at least continental market, so LNG prices would go up. And as Germany is reliant on spot traded flexible LNG, it implies a bit higher LNG prices.
And what about sort of potential diversification of natural gas in Germany regarding Africa? There are many reports, many research papers about Africa, and we're still in the level of talking more than in the level of buying. So do you see any geopolitical advantage of getting natural gas from Africa for Germany?
So there are a few established LNG exporters in Africa, and it's certainly North Africa that is a very interesting supplier, but they prefer supplying to Southern European countries because of the proximity, and that makes sense. For Germany, it's more interesting to take West African gas or even from Mozambique, and there are talks ongoing. Nevertheless, they could not fully agree on large-scale volumes yet. And I think here the issue is rather on the supply side. We need them to come online. We need them to really bring those volumes to the market, and that's what's the blocker probably.
And what about Qatar? Because Qatar has sort of peak of being a safe and reliable gas exporter, but now Qatar is slightly in the shadows, and we don't know why. Is there anything going on with Qatar, or just the current situation in the market? Because some people, they connect this to the conflicts, to human rights issues, and to several issues globally. So is Qatar going to be stable? Is Qatar going to increase supplies of natural gas? Or what's the situation with Qatar at the moment?
Qatar is planning to expand its production facilities and export potential from currently 77 million tons to around 100 million tons. So it's about a 30% increase. And they want to ramp up this expansion next year already, and they maintain this plan from what we hear. Our forecast has these volumes coming, ramping up slowly as of next year. And that means the role for Qatar to play in this world LNG market remains there. It has been the prime supplier for many years. It was overtaken by the US recently. The United States, will remain number one supplier for years to come, given the huge wave of new export terminals. Nevertheless, Qatar will increase as well and secure its second position at the expense of Australia. And that means Qatar has a role to play in export markets. They have the advantage compared to America of being closer to Asian off-takers. And that means for Qatar, the strategy is really entering the Pacific market, the Chinese off-takers and other nascent LNG emerging markets by very long-term contracts. And they have successfully already made deals with China and other off-takers. They want to secure long-term demand for their investment, to back up their, or to secure demand for their investment indeed. And the point here is Asian off-takers are more willing to commit to longer-term demand agreements and longer-term supply agreements compared to European players who like to rather be short-term or mid-term committed. And that means the role for Qatar could be that of a swing supplier for times of need in a European cold winter or so, without too many long-term contracts. I should caveat, though, on this. Qatar is entering the European market as well. So they secure import capacities. So their strategy is also quite active to go a bit more downstream, to own the full supply chain, and thereby be able to, certainly be able to deliver to the European market in times of need by holding capacities.
Andreas, is there any country we forgot to mention when it comes to geopolitical constellation of natural gas role in Germany? Sort of emerging supplier, or maybe some country that you see as a potential in the future?
Recently, there have been talks between Germany and Canada for intensifying their energy relationship. That holds for hydrogen, but it also is a game for LNG markets to play. Because Canada has abundant gas facilities, it is now exporting LNG as well. It is exporting to the Pacific market with this new LNG export facility at Vancouver on the Pacific coast. There had been plans to build an East Coast terminal in Canada as well, but they have been shelved at some point. Now they re-emerge, and Germany would be one of the key off-takers, or at least it's willing to engage into long-term trade deals with Canada. Therefore, the government of Canada and the government of Germany are promoting their energy partnership. So that's a country to watch for the coming years. Nevertheless, it's not a very short-term option really, because I don't see an export terminal in Canada being built within very shortly.
Yeah, and I know that there was the first cargo going from Canada to Japan and South Korea, which made a big headlines in the world gas business. Andreas, the last question for today's interview: what challenges can you see as an analyst for Germany regarding the natural gas situation, and do you see Germany continuing to be a country where natural gas will have a significant role in its economy, in its consumer market, and geopolitical situation or constellation?
The role of natural gas in Germany is a declining role in the long term. That's what multiple policymakers and even the industry knows, and they're coping with this challenge. Now the big challenge will be how to deal with this transition and how to deal with existing assets of gas grids, for instance. Now that users will likely drop in numbers, you will face the same infrastructure costs, and they will have to be borne by fewer consumers. So that means increasing grid tariffs for the remaining off-takers. How do you deal with the transition in terms of committing to long-term infrastructure investment, building new facilities, LNG import facilities, whilst knowing you want a gas phase-out policy for climate reasons? So that means your infrastructure facilities will have a limited time to recoup their investment cost. Same holds for domestic production increases and new licenses offshore for new gas exploration. All of these new fields would have to be operating very profitably in a short time until a phase out can be reached. And all of this is a challenge. So not committing to too long-term investments, but at the same time holding natural gas prices relatively stable, not completely exposing yourselves to the volatility of flexible spot markets. But for that, you will need a bit of a commitment to natural gas. And for the time being, gas continues playing a role in the German market. Even until the 2030s, we don't see a strongly declining role, but then the phase out will have to be accelerated towards the end of the 2030s.
Andreas, many thanks for your insightful thoughts and for sharing your insights from behind the scenes, as we say, as the head of the research. And it was a pleasure to speak with you after 2 years, I have to say. And for everyone, I would recommend to follow Andreas' LinkedIn page, where he is publishing like 5 times a day updates from the gas world, with the statistics, with the reports. And that's very valuable for us, for scholars, for academia, because we have access to data, to the opinions and reports that professional analysts produce, especially in that quality that Andreas is doing. Andreas, many thanks for being on IR Thinker.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Martin.
Thank you.